This is Don't Get Me Started. This is a conversation about advertising. And here is your host, freelance creative director and creative circus department head, Dan Balser.
Yes, welcome back to another episode of the podcast, Pandemic Edition, the last year or so. Looking at these screens, looking at my guest that we had a phone conversation a couple weeks ago. So she and I have spoken, and we came on early this morning and talked about all things pandemic and winter storm, and talked a little bit about Aaron Marshall. Shout out to Aaron Marshall and Brandon Kim.
Hey,
there you go. Dominique is in her Austin apartment, digging out of the winter storms that we've had here in early 2021. And she's a ACD, as you know. She's an ACD at GSD&M. Prior to that, she was at RGA. Sanders Wingo. I don't know what that is. We could talk about that in a second. She started off, apparently, if I'm cobbling together the resume properly, it looks to me that she started off after she graduated from Miami Ad School at Burrell in Chicago. 3.5 years at Burrell. She's won some awards, Silver Addy, Bronze Addy, and she graduated prior to going to Miami Ad School. She went to Howard University in Washington, D.C. And
I've won at the one show too.
Did I skip that? You need to update. Okay, so you need to update your resume. Yeah. Okay. Congratulations. What'd you win at the one show for?
I don't know. It was something on Samsung. I gotta go back and look at my resume and recall all the details, but won 2 awards there.
All right. So thank you for setting aside time to talk with me this morning. I really appreciate your doing it.
Yeah.
So I've got some conversation starters for us. First of all, I spent the morning looking at your work last night in the morning, and I almost texted you last night or called you to wake you up for getting this song stuck in my head from Crocs. What's the I don't want to do it again because it was keeping me up. What's the line, the verse of that? You be comfortable in what you wear or something like that?
Just be comfortable in your own shoes.
Just be comfortable in your own shoes. So here's my question for you, because I have a lot of questions. Super curious about your career so far, your path, your challenges, your successes, and your struggles. But one thing that I saw that runs as a theme throughout your work is, did you get into advertising just so you could meet amazing celebrities? Because you seem to work these celebrities there's celebrities in so much of your work. People that I imagine you're like, I want to figure out a way to meet her or him, and let's just build it. So talk to me about how, when you get a brief, you're approaching it. And I want to say this for the listeners that are listening to this conversation. Dominique Creates is the website, DominiqueCreates.com. I actually recommend that you look at the work before you listen to the rest of this conversation, because, and I'm sorry, I'm going to let you talk, I promise. There's so little self-consciousness in your writing. In other words, it doesn't seem like you sit down and you are writing an ad. There are moments in some of your work that you can tell the client walked in and said, you have to say this. But but for the most part, what I'm getting is a person's voice. I'm getting an unfiltered, unself-conscious, natural cadence, natural language, natural delivery. That is not easy for young creatives to do. So my proverbial hats off to that. But let's talk about your process after we talk about the celebrity question. So is that something that you kind of like are thinking about? Is it something that kind of happens organically in the concepting process, or am I just completely off base?
No, that I've never looked at my work with that sort of lens. So now I'm being asked to reflect on it. But pretty naturally, advertising is just to me, a vehicle to say what you want to say. And a lot of times you don't get to say what you want to say. It's so much stuff that's not on my website because it's not necessarily the point of view that I align with. But I'm like, if you want to pay me so I can put something out in the world that I believe in for millions of people to hear, then by gosh, pay me,
Yeah, for sure.
More people see commercials sometimes than movies or other things. So to me, that's what it's there for. It's taking thoughts I believe in and using a brand to elevate those thoughts and put something positive out into the world. And so that's always my train of thought, even if it's just silly, even if I could just make you smile. Hopefully I made, millions of people smile, and that's powerful to me.
Yeah, but we don't always get to do, do you find it easy to, okay, so Crocs is sort of like this don't take yourself so seriously feeling, right? And you're
Mhm.
celebrating people being comfortable in their own shoes, which is I took as a metaphor for comfortable in your own skin, which I
Mhm.
took for being like be who you are and forget what people think of you and all that kind of stuff. Like
Mhm.
I, I, I gotta imagine that it's pretty rare that like that lines up with a brief. And I mean, it doesn't feel forced to me for Crocs to say that, but like we don't always get to do that. Do you find the industry to be more rewarding than frustrating in that sense? Because I mean, your work is showing up with a lot of that, but in my experience, it's not that we get to do what you're saying very often.
I think the opportunities are few and far in between, but you have to be strategic about the opportunities you take. So it wasn't a coincidence that I worked on Crocs. That's something I interviewed for. And at the time, Crocs wasn't popular anymore. They were like, wait a minute, you want to work on Crocs? I'm like, yeah, I
Oh, that's
want
good.
to work on Crocs. Like, it's kind of quirky, it's left of center. They told me that come as you are was the tagline. And I was like, if anybody can relate to just wanting to come as you are and feeling brave enough to do that, I can relate to that. So I was like the only one in the building genuinely excited to take on that brand. And I took it all the way on. And so when I wrote the musical for that, I was talking to myself. I was in a
Right.
situation where I was the only Black person for the first time. And so, what are the things I need to hear? What are the things I need to connect with? And that helped inspire the work. So,
Really interesting. That is really cool and lucky. That well, I shouldn't say lucky. Who is it that says that you make your hard work makes luck? Is that Serena said that? I think. I
I
think
don't know.
I think it
I
was
think,
Serena Williams that said hard work makes your luck. Um,
mm,
so how did you sort of get introduced to this as a career? I mean, one of the challenges that I have putting it all out there as a guy who runs a program at the Creative Circus and ad school is the pipeline. It's the pipeline, to be completely honest with you. And part
yeah.
of that is that it's an industry that has historically been one where people are privileged, have the opportunity to train themselves at an ad school and go into the business. And also, it's an industry that I don't think is on the radar of a lot of Black communities because it kind of seems it's not a traditional career. It's not a doctor, lawyer, or a banker type of career. So how were you exposed to the opportunity in this industry young? Because you were an advertising undergrad major, which I wasn't. I didn't even know it was a business then. So how did you get your introduction to it, and how did you get started in it?
Yeah, I really just love like the Mentos commercials and anything with the jingle. When Snapple had their radio commercials at a time that were jingles, I wanted to be a jingle writer very
Hmm.
specifically. Um, and I went to Howard University. I majored in advertising. It wasn't until senior year, right before I graduated, that I was like, what am I actually doing though? So I went to a career fair and I brought my book. Uh, and a recruiter actually laughed in my face. And it was a Black woman too. I don't even know if she laughed in my face. Whatever she said, it definitely felt like a laugh in my face.
Right.
And she goes, you need to go to that table. And even though I was offended, it was the Miami Ad School table. And another guy was there, and we were supposed to be interviewing at this career fair. And he's like, do you even want to be here? Are you even interested in any of these companies? And I'm like, no, actually, I'm not. Like, I'm just
Right.
here to get school credit. So I went to the Miami Ad School table. And that after majoring in advertising, it still took that end of the year to go, oh, copywriting. Oh, like this is what I need to be doing. There is a school that can help me specifically with the creative part. I don't suck. I just didn't have a program that focused on the creative side of advertising.
What were you good at? What were you good at in high school and college? Like, what was the thing that, relatively speaking, you were better than average at? Like, was it just being funny? Was it being observant? Was it being like,
I've always been a great writer. So English is a place where I excel fairly easily.
mhm.
I was cheer captain. Um, so
Okay.
I'm really good at motivating people, not to be like all cliche, but I like to motivate other people. I'm good in front of a crowd. I'm
Right.
good presenting. Like I can make you believe anything in a presentation. Some of those celebrities, there was no celebrity budget. It's just I went into work with somebody and I did their impression. I got it so ingrained in their head that they went and found me some celebrity money. So
Oh, that is awesome. That's
Right. So that's something I do well is storytelling, writing, presenting, and just doing my own thing. I didn't have a lot of friends when I graduated high school. I had one, probably my cheerleading coach by the end of high school. And I was real okay with that. Like I just did my own thing and a lot of people didn't understand it.
right.
And I was just okay with them not understanding it.
But what you just said is so important. I mean, you got Jennifer Lewis in here like that. I'm not sure if you're going to say like, okay, we're going to do like, this is a commercial for friggin' like hardware and services. And somehow you've got Jennifer Lewis in here walking around with a bunch of half naked male models. And like, I could see this. I could see you selling this so hard that like we can't do something else. Like this has to be what this thing is. And I think that coming out of school or even in school or even for young professionals, I don't think that theater component is emphasized enough. I think that the internal reviews, the client presentations, it's about performances. It's about performing, and you have to have the guts to do that. You have to have the guts to stand up with a microphone and do stand up once in your life, right? But every day that's kind of like that, right? And I'm calling you out on that because I know that you did that. But
Yeah.
this idea of like selling in your idea is not. I think it's important because I think that I think a lot of people have this bias where they think that selling in an idea is a douchey thing where you're convincing someone to do something, but it's not. It's about bringing people on board with you. It's actually a more inclusive thing than it is a persuasive thing. So it's about getting people to see things your way in a really fun way. So that now that you said that, like I can hear you in Charlie Murphy, I can hear you in Kevin Hart, I can hear you in all of these people whom you've tapped. I can hear you in Drew Barrymore. So this aligns for me, but it's not by accident. It's not like you're sitting down. It's like, okay, well, who can we get for this? Like, no, I think that like this idea expressed this way is best coming out of this person. And
Yeah.
I think that's really friggin' cool because none of it feels contrived or forced or stupid. It's not arbitrary.
It's interesting you called out Jennifer Lewis, who's on Blackish, because that was a situation where we didn't have a celebrity budget. And based on the brief, I just wasn't writing anything very interesting. And so sometimes I go, well, if it were a celebrity, who would it be? Like, who on this interesting? Howard. So I took on her persona just to get me to a creative place, but I took it on so well that it had to be her, and I'm a worldly woman, and that's just how I had to present the spot. And you can't just fill in another gap here. It has to be her. And she actually never had a national campaign in her like 40-year career, so it meant the world to her. And they found the money to work with her.
You did a good job of this. Well, what you said was really interesting. I think that what you said was the scripts that given the brief weren't that interesting, and I think what you've done here. And this podcast, Dominique, sort of historic has never been about advertising and the craft and all of what we're talking about. But I think for me, this is personally really interesting because I had this, and I think a lot of young people, especially out of a good ad program, look at the limitations of these things and get frustrated. And I think what you've done here with this one in particular is you created this over the top persona that in itself is really sticky visually, really sticky orally. So you want to follow this story, even though what she's talking about is dreadfully boring. It's terrible.
Yes.
It's silly bullshit, AT&T bullshit. But you've got this really entertaining sort of, and you've got these really great cuts with these really great sort of seamless cuts and stuff. So you made something really cool out of something that potentially could have been really easy to ignore. And I think it comes from you sitting there saying like, well, what would be fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would be a cool way to kind of be this? You invented that. So obviously that's our job, but I think oftentimes we kind of bail before we get there. So, all right, let's go here for a second. So I got to be really honest with you on this one. I watched your Black is Human piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched these young boys talking about what they want to be when they grow up. And for the listeners that don't know this is a spot. And this gives me a tear and chills when I read your setup. that research shows that Black boys are seen as older, less innocent, and more prone to police brutality, right? How do you pull a trigger on a child? You don't see him as one, is what you said. And when I watch these kids say they want to grow up to protect, my body just kind of shivered.
Mhm.
And this to me is, and then in the cruelest irony of all, one of the kids in the spot ends up being a victim in Chicago of gun violence. So
Mhm.
talk to me about, was this a brief? Was this a cause that you wanted to work on that came to you? Did you seek this out? How, as a professional, do you apply your desire to make change and your desire to express what's important to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. It actually wasn't a brief. It was an experience of mine. So back when Trayvon Martin's shooting happened and the Black Lives Matter movement first picked up, back when it was taboo to even discuss it, at work, I went out to the protest. So the protest was passing our office building. And so I joined the protest and I'd been out there for 2 minutes tops. And they'd been out there for hours. I didn't know that. I was out there for 2 minutes tops and I was arrested. They hadn't even done arrest that whole time. I was the first person that got arrested. And so it was really odd because I just felt this hand tugging me. Like no one said you're under arrest. You're just grabbing me. So I could actually process like when someone say, oh, you assaulted an officer. If someone's grabbing you in a crowd, you might turn around, defend yourself. No one's telling you you're under arrest. And then I'm like, well, why am I under arrest? And they're like, oh, the captain just said we had to make some arrests. So they didn't even try to pretend like I did anything wrong. And so then they put me in this paddy wagon and they started arresting some other women. And he was being really rough with me. And I saw another woman getting arrested. And I'm like, can you look at how they're handling her? Can you adjust? So he loosened up his grip with me. And I'm like, I just got out here. I've been out here for 2 minutes. Somehow I'm the first one arrested. Everyone's chanting for my freedom. It felt like I felt like Katniss Everdeen. Like, how did I become this person? I was just leaving work saying Black Lives Matter. And here we are. And so going to jail that night, no one knew I was at the protest because I just got out there. I didn't get to text anybody. No one's heard from me.
What city was this in?
This is in Chicago.
Okay.
It's a very long story as to what I went through that night.
No, keep going. Keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's not on this podcast to tell that full story, but I will say that I cried for about a full day after I was released, and my husband is like, "Why are you crying?" Because I wasn't talking to him either. When I got home, I showered. He was my boyfriend at the time. And he just goes, it's been 18 hours. Like, why are you still crying? I'm like, I'm not crying because I'm hurt, even though I am. I'm like, I'm crying because it was beautiful. Because no one knew I was out there. No one knew me. But when I was released, it was all these protesters in the cold of Chicago waiting on me with blankets, waiting on me with water bottles. These strangers knew I was there, and these strangers weren't leaving until I got released. And so for the first time in my life, I experienced a little bit of what it felt like to be a Black male. To be arrested for no reason, to be harassed for no reason and taken away and locked up. And I told my now husband, like, this is what you've been going through your whole life. I can't believe that. But there were still so many people who were there for me and who were fighting for him and fighting for me. And that was beautiful. And so I'm like, and this is what young boys are going through. He's been going through this since he was a boy. And so I'm like, everyone's talking about this story, and Trayvon was a boy. And they're talking about him like he's a man. And so I just felt like after that experience for me, I wanted to give Black boys a voice because no one had heard what they had to say. And they have an opinion about it. So that's where it came from.
Wow. And it's a Facebook community, Black is Human. Is it still active?
I don't think it's still up, but I don't think it's still active. To be transparent, I wanted to do this video. I went to my agency and said, I'm doing this video. I've already coordinated. I've talked to the principal. I've written letters to the parents to get permission. All you have to do is say yes if you want to send me a camera crew or something. And they were like, absolutely, but who is this going to be from? So we created the Black is Human brand so that it can come from someone. And the idea was to continue doing different videos, but shortly after I left the agency.
Right.
So I think it kind of fell off there. And that's how I got my first awards. And that helped me end up getting selected in Cannes for See It Be It and like that. I didn't even know what awards. And so my career has taken off from doing something I believe in, really, at the end of the day.
That's really inspiring to me because I think a lot of people might have had similar experiences, but once they were out and went back to work, that's the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the fact that you reflected on it and saw something more than your own experience, I think is really, I mean, that honestly, I think that's what artists do. And I think that's really, I mean, hats off again, really just badass, really, really, really cool.
Thank you. And I don't know if I was gonna say, I don't know if you saw on the website, I went in to do a campaign called If I Grow Up. I'm like, these boys aren't even growing up. But the irony was when I actually filmed them, they all wanted to be police officers. And I didn't tell them to say that.
You
And
did
so
not tell them to say that. Wow.
no, the majority of the boys under the age of 12 said, if I grow up, I want to be a police officer. And about 7th grade is where it changed and they wanted to be something else. And my creative director was with me. And she goes, Dom, I know we came to film this, but are you listening to what they're saying? So I'm going, wow, we're talking about police brutality and all they want to do is be policemen so that they can protect their community. And it reminded us of what policing should look like. And so instead of pushing the story I went in to tell, I thought it was important to tell their story.
That's another hats off. That's what not having a client will do with you.
Yeah, so that wasn't luck. That was me,
Listening.
things happened and let's find a way to tell this story.
I love it. I think it's just incredible.
When I grow up, I want to be a police officer.
I want to be a policeman.
I want to be a policeman. I want to be a police officer.
I want to join the SWAT team.
When I grow up, I'm going to be a police officer.
I want to be a policeman because I want to help people.
I want to protect my family.
So I can stop violence. I want to save lives to innocent Black kids.
At this point, words appear on the screen. They want to protect us. Shouldn't we protect them? Before we start talking about pivoting back to like your career as a future creative director, ACD copywriter, can we talk about this situation that happened with you being, I'm going to just go ahead and spill it and say that you were labeled and criticized at an agency for being overly ambitious.
Yeah.
And you were working in a place that just did not know how to handle, and basically finally privately admitted to you that they're a problem. Can you talk to me a little bit about the experience that you've had being ambitious, being normal in a world that doesn't want it?
Yeah. It's interesting because very few people can say this, but I have had the privilege of being in predominantly Black spaces my whole life. So the neighborhood I grew up in was Black. I'm from Chicago. I went to Howard University. From Harris went, that's university. Miami Ad School wasn't predominantly Black.
Say that again after Howard, because I think you broke up for a second. So you were at Howard HBCU.
Yeah, that's where Kamala Harris went, the vice president.
Yeah, okay.
Miami Ad School wasn't necessarily Black, but it was global. So many people were from everywhere. I didn't feel like such an oddball. It was such a melting pot. And then Burrell Communications is a Black ad agency, and Sanders Wingo is a multicultural ad agency that's owned by Black people. So I know what it feels like to be respected and to be comfortable and do your thing. And some Black people are used to growing up in spaces that aren't Black. And so they let a lot of things slide. But I was treated differently, and it stood out because I'm like, whoa, I'm not being treated the same as everybody else. So this is odd. And ambition isn't a problem in the Black community. Black women are, doing all sorts of things. Again, look at the vice president. So that's welcomed in our community. And this is the first time where ambition was a bad thing. And I didn't quite understand it. What I know now is that company had never hired a Black person in their office. I didn't know that when I got the job.
Can I ask a question? Without diminishing this reality, did they have any female leadership?
Yes. That was actually part of the problem. So it was mostly female leadership. And so when I would come forward and say, hey, I'm experiencing bias, the response is, was literally, I guarantee you, you're not experiencing bias.
Oh, great. Nice.
My response was, I guarantee you cannot guarantee that. And so the mindset was, well, you're a woman. It's all this women leadership. You're on a team with women. How could you be experiencing bias? But I'm with white women. And so we can't act like I'm not Black just because I'm with women. And so I couldn't even have the conversation.
God.
Yeah.
I
and
feel
the ambition.
terrible.
Oh, go ahead.
It makes me feel bad. Anyway, go ahead.
No, I was just saying.
I have just classic white guilt right now. Go ahead.
Well, you know, the history of white women and Black women in this country goes back to slavery, and you know how Black women were treated by slave masters and honestly raped, and white women being jealous because you just had a baby with my husband, but I didn't want to have a baby with your husband. You know what I mean? Nobody wanted this, and it's an odd relationship in this country that is not talked about until you've heard recently with all the Karen memes or whatever, but it's stemming from somewhere.
Let me clarify something too, for people who might be thinking like, oh yeah, okay, 150 years ago. But you know what? This is generational. This is a way of looking at the world. This is a way of having embedded white privilege in your outlook of life, because it's how your great-grandparents and grandparents and parents have basically seen the world. And I think that until we all become acutely aware of our own place, our white privilege, and what that really means, we're never going to really understand those interrelational situations. One of the best things that I did last summer was I sat on a panel. I think I might have mentioned on a previous episode of the podcast. There are 900 people on this Zoom talking about growing up white in the South and what it means. And it was only white people talking about our experience as white people. And it was profound because it's something that isn't discussed and isn't acknowledged. And these women that you're talking about in the agency were completely blind and unaware of the things that they take for granted and the way that they process the world around them in their whiteness. They don't understand their whiteness because it's like saying, am I having fingernails or am I having 10 toes? It's not something they've ever looked at and understood. So sorry.
No, that context matters, especially for the listeners. And it's something I understood in the moment that you don't understand. But what I need you to do is when I say it's a problem, at least believe me, at least consider that, well, maybe there is something we haven't thought about. And there was no consideration. There was just silencing me. You know, I didn't go in with the R word, with the racist. Could there be some bias here? Like, I'm not even from the South and everybody is. Well, like, can we agree
But Dom, there's never not bias. There's literally never not bias. We have it every single interaction we have with every single thing we do. There's that's why it's called unconscious bias, because you can deny it all day long. You're not feeling it, but it's informing you on almost a molecular level.
Yes. So the original question was about the ambition.
Right, ambition.
It was just, ambition anywhere else would be considered a positive thing. And me asking questions was considered challenging. And I'm like, I'm inquisitive. It's my first week. Who doesn't have questions? Why am I challenging? Why is it bad that I want to get this detail right on set? You know, the Black girl's hair looks crazy, but your response to me is you're pulling the race card. No, her hair looks crazy. And you can't see that because you're not familiar with Black hair. Okay, so now I'm too ambitious. Things like that. So it was just a lot. And that's when I learned I can't be in a space where I don't feel safe. I never knew what it felt like to feel unsafe. I have a very stable family environment that I was raised in. When people say, oh, I want to thank my haters, all the people who said I couldn't make it. I don't have any haters. Nobody ever, they tried to say that at my toast. And to all your haters who said you couldn't make it. I'm like, no one ever told me I couldn't make it. And they're like, what? Are you kidding me? I'm like, no one. Everyone had full faith that I would make it. You know, that's the environment I grew up in. So this is my first time in a toxic environment, and it took a toll on me.
Yeah, it would. It would. It would when it's basically like, you know, it's the heat's turned up in my office. It's 100 degrees. It's like, no, it's that's your problem that you're hot. It's not hot in there. It's not hot in there. My thermometer, it's 100 degrees. just denying someone's reality and you know what? There's also so many layers on the other side. There's also being threatened by someone young and talented. There's also that, basically people feeling like their territory's threatened, their authority's threatened. That has nothing to do necessarily even with the color of your skin, but the fact that you are an outspoken, talented young junior who needs to stay in her spot. And it's horrible. It's a toxic, horrible. I'm so happy, smiling that you got out of that place.
Yeah. And it was strange because I was being celebrated throughout the rest of the company, just not in my office.
Yeah.
So I'm being acknowledged in Cannes, one of 20 women who was selected globally for the CABA program in Cannes. I'm doing the biggest work that has ever come out of the office. I'm doing award-winning work that's getting global recognition, the only one in the office doing that. So it's like, why is my ambition a problem? Is doing so much for the agency. Why is that a bad thing? To the point where you'll see in the article, the partner of mine got double the raise. He ended up getting like double the raise that I got. And I'm like, why is that? It was like I don't really care what people say about me, but I care about my paycheck at the end of the day.
Oh, you should care. I care about all of it. I think, it's just not just.
Yeah. So the better I did, the worse my money got. And it was all very confusing.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you moved on. It's good.
Yeah.
So let's shift gears a little bit. So, again, a little bit that we've known each other, like you're clearly creative director material. The people that you've worked under, creative directors that you've respected, what are some of the traits of those CDs that you would love to emulate or that have, felt that have empowered you to do good work and be happy at work, fulfilled?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's been so many great people. I think back to my first creative director. I was his first junior and he was my first creative director. It was his first time being a creative director, my first time having one. Terrence Burrell, who is in no relation to Burrell, who actually founded the agency.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he was very collaborative. He never made me feel like I was too young or I didn't know anything. I would call him my boss and he's like, I'm not your boss. I'm just your creative director. So just, there was a level playing field. It was an exchange of ideas. And so I always want to do that for people who I am working with. This is an exchange of ideas. Let's help make this better. It's not just you reporting to me. Also the ones who, Lewis Williams, who's the chief creative officer at Burrell Communications, it was a very much like you could tell he cared about his staff in a fatherly way. And so the older I get, the more of that like mom instinct kicks in where I want to care for the people around me. So feeling cared for, being collaborative, and allowing people to be their true selves without restricting that. It was just so much encouragement that I never thought twice about holding back.
That's really great. I can see that from you as well. That's really cool. So what personal trait of yours, what do you think it is about you that has served you well so far?
I think the things that serve me well are the things that get me in trouble.
That's probably very true, right? It's a double-edged sword. Like what?
It's a double-edged sword. I'm a truth teller. A lot of people don't want to hear the truth. But the truth is what is provocative and it's where the strong insights are. And it's the work that needs to be made. It's also the thing that makes people uncomfortable. It makes them not want to pay you. Like, here she goes again. But being a truth teller has served me. Understanding who I am, having a strong self-identity has served me. Because you can tell me who you think I am all day, but I don't have to believe it. And a lot of people start to believe the things that are said about them. So the fact that I don't believe it and I can push, I know the difference between constructive criticism and criticism.
Right. That truth teller thing is something that, because you'll see that as you rise in ranks and you start supervising teams, it's terrifying. It's terrifying to talk to someone who is going to give you the truth. I remember I went to when I was in New York for years, I went to a group therapy on Wednesday mornings,
Mm.
and I couldn't sleep Tuesday nights for fear of that mirror and fear of that truth showing up Wednesday morning. And I think that also people have found me as a teacher at the Creative Circus to be either intimidating or something like that, because I feel like I at least always strive to always tell the truth and tell you exactly what's happening. And that's sort of, it's sort of like, oh, that's your problem. If you can't handle, if you're not ready for it, you can't handle the truth. It's not, but it's just such a great way to live, I think, because it's just so simple.
But you know what? It's become a little more complicated for me as I get older, because I used to not care what people think. And to a standpoint, I don't, but I care how people feel.
Right. You have to say it well.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. There's a teacher at VCU named Mark Fensky who used to be on our board, and he's like a gruff, sort of almost a mean. And you could tell the truth mean, or you can tell the truth neutrally. And I think that there's a way to bring someone to truth. The way you're talking about your creative directors collaboratively, and you're on the same side. The problem comes when you have people saying like, "Oh, you're being overly ambitious for pointing out the black girl's hair on set." That's truth. And the problem now is that in many, many ways, micro and macro, the world exists with multiple sets of truth.
Yeah.
So this isn't a matter of my subjective opinion that this woman's hair is messed up. This woman's hair is messed up. That's fact. The problem comes when we live in an industry and a society now where everyone has the right to disagree with your truth.
Right.
And that's deeply problematic.
Right.
So I don't mean to get too philosophical on the podcast, but yeah, it's not always that simple. So I'm sorry for saying it's simple.
It should be. It should be that simple, though.
It should.
So I'm working on. I've been coddling a bunch of folks, and I'm working on that balance of truth telling, but also being empathetic towards how someone's going to receive that information. It's like advertising. How you package the information does matter. So finding my way in doing that, and knowing that coming from a Black woman, I can say the same thing a white guy says, and it's aggressive, and it's like, I just said the same thing he said. So there's an awareness that comes with that even though I didn't say it any differently, you're still receiving it differently. So
and the challenge becomes like, at that point when that happens, is that on you to point that out? Is it on you to be the police of racial relations? Is it on you, or sexual, gender, for you to say, would you say that if I were white? Would you say that if I were a man? Why is that burden put on you? And then it's so complicated, because what you're saying is 100% correct. And as instructors and creative directors, we need to basically give the same feedback to people in an equitable way, not necessarily equal way, but to know that what you're doing is loaded and biased. Anyway, whatever. I don't know. I'm sorry.
No, you're on point today. I'm nodding and agreeing with all of these statements.
Nice. So this is the last question on this topic, and then we're going to move on. And this could be off base. All right. Tell me if I'm off base on this, but what if I have a student who's really high in the class, really talented, really good, Black creative, who has an offer at Burrell, and due to timing, that's the job offer they have, but their ambition is to go to a Wieden or a GSD&M, or not a niche agency, not an agency that focuses on a specific type of work. What would you say to that person about the opportunity at a place like that, where they kind of feel there's a bias against, not reaching their ambition early on?
Yeah. I get that question a lot, and it really depends on the situation. So I'll give you an example. I know a young Black man who he was interested in Burrell. And my talk to him was, what do you need right now? Like, we're in the middle of a health pandemic, a racial pandemic. Do you need safety? Because I understand that. If you just need to go and be around other Black men and see yourself and feel inspired and not deal with the craziness, in your workplace right now, then this is a good move for you. Also, the thing about these smaller agencies is you sink or swim. I was presenting to CMOs 6 months in. It was nothing. Cool. Like You caught it, you ate it. Those were the rules. And so I learned so much. That's how I became such a strong creative. So for him, I'm like, absolutely, that's where you should be based on what you need in this moment. I have another Black woman who has different ambitions, and she doesn't need the safety as much. And, she's in a different place emotionally, and her goals are different. So this isn't the best place for you then. And so I think you just have to look at the situation. It is a myth that once you're there, you're typecasted. Was it hard for me to get out? Absolutely. Not because Varela did anything wrong, just because people think for some reason, if you did Black ads, you can't do anything else. It's like, I live in America like everybody else. Like, I'm familiar with the general market like everybody else. Obviously. Which is why I moved to Austin, to break out of that typecast. But it's so many people who come from Burrell who work all over the place, creative directors all over the place. It's just what you want to do at the moment.
It's interesting you say that, because when we were talking about it earlier, and I held off of that question until now, but I was thinking about my old partner, John. You and I talked for a second about my partner, John, who owns an agency in Austin called Greatest Common Factory. And when we got out of school, we moved to New York and worked together at Ogilvy, New York for 3 years. And that was one challenge I didn't have in my first job, dealing with a new partner. And and your first job is sort of an internship. It's like a residency. It's like you're still learning how agencies work, and how you present to creative directors, and how client relationships work, and timelines and budgets. And not having to worry about a partner was a really great thing for me. Not having to worry about being the Black creative, or being some other in a big agency at all, even if it's not real, you feel it. Not having that challenge at the first job, I think, enabled you possibly to like feel so comfortable, felt like an extension of your home, your college experience, where it was just about learning the work.
Exactly.
Learning your craft, learning how you get shit sold and produced. So it launched you. So that's great.
And it worked for me. Again, it was challenging for me, but I feel like there's no challenge we can't get past. They're going to be, if you come out of a digital shop, people are sometimes going to think all you can do is digital. If you come out of a TV shop, they're like, oh, but that's so old. We do social, right? So that can happen anywhere. You can get typecasted anywhere. It's just about how you strategically pivot and what's right for you in your life at the moment.
Right. Pharma, whatever it is, you get typecast, and you're not permanently typecast ever, believe me. Right. All right. Last question for you, and then I'm going to let you go on with your day. So thank you so much for all this. It's just really great conversation. I hope people agree with me. I hope I've had fun. So if you could go back in time to January 2012, when you graduated from Miami Ad School, what would you whisper in young Dominique Curtis's ear? Knowing what you know now, what would you whisper in your own ear?
I would say, you got it, girl. Like, you got it. Don't let them tell you don't got it. Because people try to tell you is all you see is wrong with you. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect, but you pick up insecurities along the way, right? Based on the things that people say to you, and based on ideas other people put into your head. But if you just stay true to who you are, that got you this far. It's going to keep getting you further and further and further. So I would just say, like, you're fine. You're great. And don't let them tell you otherwise. That doesn't mean there's not room to improve copy or things like that. I'm not talking about technically, but like, as a person, as an individual, as a creative, you have everything it takes. So like, don't ever doubt that.
Did you second guess your instincts?
Yeah.
Cool.
I was lucky enough to have, though. I remember a Black woman came on set and said, I see what's happening in this scene. I see that you see it's not right, but I see you're not saying anything. Why is that? But I had people around me to say, no, we hired you for a reason. Go in there, tell them it's not right.
Is that a real person or some angel you imagine? Because that's badass story. That is so fucking lucky you had that.
That's a real person, Shantika Seigers. She said, we hired you for a reason. She recruited me to Austin. And on that very same set, actually, the director got so upset with me that, and I didn't know it in the moment. He just said, okay, well, you direct it then. And I directed the rest of the commercial. I didn't know that wasn't normal. I just got the shots I needed to close out my spot, and it closed out my spot. But that was a gender thing. Like, you didn't want a young woman Here I am not speaking, then I speak, and you want to fold your arms and say, well, you directed then. And you know what? I directed it, and we got our shot, and our client was happy. So you just got to do what you got to do.
That's sometimes the reel doesn't align with the experience. I mean, you see this reel and it's perfect, and you hire them and you get on set and it's not, there's something a little bit off. It's a little bit off.
Yeah.
It does happen.
Yeah.
So, wow. Well, thank you so much for talking. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me. This was fun. You got to share it with me once it's all put together.
I'll definitely do that. I want to just say, Alex Escalar Sanchez, thank you so much for introducing me to Dominique. Listeners, if you want to check out Dominique's Twitter, it's at Domnificence, DOMNIFICENCE, Domnificence. I'll share it somewhere. I'll share it on my own Twitter, which is Dan Balser. That's where you can find the podcast. You can find it at Spotify. You can email me at danspodcast@mac.com. It's been my email since I think 1974. No, the internet wasn't around then, but it's been about that long. Podcast on, and also if you're up for it, leave a review on the Apple podcast store or iTunes store, whatever it's called now. I appreciate that. And wow, Dominique, thank you so much. I'm glad you got your power on, water on, everything's back to normal. And your new friend on the floor in front of you, what's his name again?
Oh, her name is Pepper.
Her name, Pepper behaved herself. We thought we might have some barking during this. I'm glad.
She was snoring. I don't know if the snoring I picked up in the audio. I nudged her to get her to wake up. So if you heard some snoring, he wasn't snoring because I was so boring. Pepper was snoring because I'm not playing with her.
That's cool. Thanks again. I really appreciate it. Listeners, thank you. I'll see you again soon. Until later. Bye.